Good, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Barker Gilmore webinar here. I'm just going to give a few minutes, just a couple of minutes. Everyone's just coming on live now, so we're just going to let everyone get situated on the website here. It'll only take a minute here, but we're watching the numbers pile in. It's one of our biggest turnouts for the year, and it doesn't surprise me. The title here, how to successfully navigate the GC CEO board dynamic, and we have just an incredible gift for everyone today. AB Cruz has invited his friends, reached out to his network, and to get two GCs and two CEOs to come in and talk about this dynamic is incredibly helpful for all of us. One of the things when we're doing general counsel search, people are constantly asking me, hey, what do I really need to do to be qualified to become a general counsel? And I will say that experience navigating with the CEO and the board, that interaction is critically important when you're interviewing, to be able to describe your approach and your experience and your successes and even your failures doing so. So I mean, people are interested in all of it. So anyway, welcome to our webinar. We're thrilled to have everybody sign in here today. So Ava, we'll just move forward here. Just a quick plug on Barker Gilmore. We are search consultants. We're coaches and advisors. We're focusing on the general counsel positions, the chief compliance officer positions, but also we're helping GCs and CCOs build their departments. So, and one area that we're making incredible progress is helping with diversity. And we all know diversity is important at the top, but it's important through the ranks. So if anyone out there is looking for the highest quality talent and looking at diverse slates of candidates for these positions, you've come to the right spot. And the same on the coaching and advising. Our team of Fortune 500 general counsel and CCOs that are doing this work, having someone who sat in that seat is critically important. And we'll go up to the next slide here, April. We do these GC Advantage webinars on a monthly basis. As I say, we're thrilled to be able to invite talent that can roll up their sleeves and talk about real life stories. Next month, we're talking in terms of leading legal teams in today's unpredictable dynamic business environment. And one of the things that people have been talking about is businesses changing strategy regularly. And with that change in strategy, it causes the GCs and CCOs to really need to be at the table when the strategy is being discussed, so they can talk about potential risks and risk management. So it's really going to be another great webinar. All of these webinars are really geared toward helping people become better general counsel, better chief compliance officers, or even just better advisors in the legal or compliance department. During the webinar, feel free to submit questions anytime. We'll try to get to some questions throughout the webinar, so we'll make it as interactive as possible. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll leave a few minutes to answer some of these questions as well. So we'll do our best to get to them. Right, if you just scroll down, you'll see the questions and answers topic. That you just click on that link. And then I'll just put out, this webinar is being recorded. So if you need to get off because of business requirements, please feel free. You'll be getting a link and you can share that link with your friends and colleagues down the road. But a few weeks from now, everyone will receive that link. So all that said, we do have the Admiral. If you look at AB setting, you'll say, what the heck, what is this guy all about? And true enough, we have a Navy Admiral in our ranks here. We couldn't be happier to have AB. And AB, we appreciate you reaching out to your network. And most of the people here today on our panel are out traveling for business and just in their hotel rooms, taking time out of their busy schedule. So we really appreciate that. And all that said, I'm going to pass it off to AB to introduce his panel and himself. So thanks again, everyone.
Hey, thank you very much, John. And April, thank you for all your help and support to get this webinar together. Welcome to everyone to how to successfully navigate the GC, CEO, and board dynamic. I will say that although general counsel, CEOs, and boards, as we all know, each have unique and specific roles and responsibilities, their ability to work together in a coordinated and complementary fashion is critical to the sound functioning of an organization. To all of those on this call, that may sound intuitive, but not always easily achieved. Indeed, the capacity for this important triad to create a healthy working dynamic amongst themselves, one that's grounded in trust, confidence, and collaboration is really key. You know, today we're going to build on Barker Gilmore's webinar of last year, led by our colleague Peter Gantz, at which the panel discussed what it takes to forge a strong and rewarding connection between the board and the GC, and during which the audience learned the importance of GCs having what we call a high versatility quotient, and the desire for the board GC relationship, again, to be grounded in mutual trust and respect. We also hope to touch on or highlight the work of another Barker Gilmore colleague of ours, Gian Navica, who penned a recent article on how boards can better leverage the GC as a strategic asset by specifically seeking out the GC's points of view on matters, given that the GC uniquely bears an ethical obligation to the company and not to one individual or body like the C-suite. So I encourage you, each of you, to access the Barker Gilmore website if you want to tap into and watch that webinar or to read that article. Without further ado, I'm just super excited about the panel that we've assembled here. They're truly exceptional and very special, I might add, and you'll understand why. Our first panelist, Paul Konopka, is the Vice President, General Counsel, Corporate Secretary, and Chief Compliance Officer at Trellisware Technologies. Prior to Trellisware, Paul was at Viasat, and before that, he worked at both Latham & Watkins and MoFo, Morrison and Forster, some named law firms there. Paul also served in the United States Marine Corps for over 30 years, recently retiring as a full bird colonel. Welcome, Paul. Our next panelist, Marty Lorenzo, is the Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary at Medtronic's Renal Care Solutions. Prior to that, he was the GC and Corporate Secretary at Viasat. Prior to that, Marty worked at Petco and the law firms of DLA Piper, Mintz-Levin, and Kilpatrick Townsend. Like Paul, Marty served in the U.S. Marine Corps, both as an enlisted member and an officer. He retired as a major after over 32 years of military service. Welcome, Marty. Isaac Johnson, our next panelist, is the President and CEO of TDECU, a credit union based in Houston with over 370,000 members, and is currently serving on several boards, including most recently joining the board of the Army and Air Force Exchange Service. In earlier years, Isaac served as TDECU's GC and Chief Risk Officer, so he's been in that seat before. He was the Corporate Secretary at USAA and also held leadership roles at Wells Fargo and Trustmark Bank, and worked at the law firm of Thompson and Knight. If that weren't enough, Isaac is also known as Major General Johnson, the current Commanding General of U.S. Army Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command Airborne. The two-star general just surpassed, I believe, 34 or thereabouts years of military service. Welcome, General. Finally, but certainly not least, my friend Carl Liebert. He's been a CEO several times over, having led Keller Williams, AutoNation, and 24 Hour Fitness. He is also the COO back a few years ago at USAA and held senior leadership roles at Home Depot, Circuit City, and GE. In terms of his board service, the list is long and I won't go into it, but it includes Keller Williams, USAA, V Foundation, Naval War College Foundation, I'll stop there. Most notably, at least to me, is that Carl is a fellow graduate of the United States Naval Academy and was a starter of the naval basketball team alongside his teammate David the Admiral Robinson, and that team went on to the Elite Eight in the NCAA tournament in '87, I believe. He is also a distinguished graduate, recently selected by at the Navy Supply School, and also served in uniform for a few years, 5 years, I think. So I hope that you all picked up on the common thread through our panelists here, including myself. And that makes this particular gathering extra special, at least for us. And I did a quick tally. That's about 135 years of military service represented on this panel, all told. And we're still counting because General Johnson's still going at it. So welcome all of you. And I'm going to just jump into the questions, and we'll go from there. I'm going to give a quick heads up to Paul and Marty, because this question is going to hit you first. So here we go. The role of GC is typically multifaceted. I think we all know that, and arguably unique within the C-suite. Marty and Paul, as our incumbent GCs here, please help set the stage by describing the various hats you wear as GCs in your respective organization, but more importantly, give our audience your take on the ethical obligation that makes your role as GCs unique. Marty, I'm going to go to you first, and then we'll hit Paul right after that.
Roger that. Thanks, AB, and really glad to be here. I'm super excited that we at least have two Marines on the panel. It's very helpful to make sure that the rest of the services stay in line. So really glad for that balance here. You mentioned the title of General Counsel, AB, and you and I actually have had a debate about whether General Counsel is the appropriate title or Chief Legal Officer and what that means. And so I'd like to add a little bit of flavor into it and say I prefer the title of Chief Legal Officer because of it says three different things. Chief to me means leader. It's the one throat to choke. So if the CEO or the board have an issue with anything legal compliance, I'm the guy, and it's my neck on the line, if you will. Legal, as the title states, it's the focus of the function. We're an attorney, we cover risk, we cover compliance, et cetera. An officer, so that's the broader perspective, whereas legal is specific to the function. Officer is the role of the company. As you said at the outset, we have responsibility not just to our fellow senior leadership team members, or not the attorney for the CEO, but we have a responsibility to the board and to the rest of the company. So those three words all combine to that Chief Legal Officer title. And so to me, those are the hats that I wear, if you will. And from a ethical purposes or an ethical perspective, it really boils down to which hat am I wearing? The easier solutions or the easier situations are those where the hat is very specific. Hey, this is an investigation, I'm wearing the legal hat. This is a compliance matter, we're wearing the compliance hat, et cetera. But who recalls that old classic Dr. Seuss book about Bartholomew, whatever his name was, Cubbins, who wore the 500 hats? It's more often that's the case. So which hat is most prominent on the head at the time? That's really how it boils down for me, which ethical obligation or where my ethical duties lie. And with that, I'll pause and pass it over to Paul.
Yeah, Marty, I would agree and echo much or all of what you just said. I think oftentimes you can see, especially in-house counsel, they get these very lengthy titles that go through each of the different hats they're wearing. In my case, Vice President, General Counsel, Corporate Secretary, and Chief Compliance Officer. I think you did a great job of summarizing it under the umbrella of just Chief Legal Officer. Additional roles. You're a manager of people. You're also a vice president of the company, officer of the company. So all these different hats converge in one person, one place. I agree again with what Marty says. Understanding what hat you have on drives your ethical obligations. I would just add to that, though, there's the reciprocal side of it, like who's your client, who you're talking to, right? Often it's very easy to pick up. I'm wearing my Chief Compliance Officer hat. I'm working on a compliance matter. But there's places where that can get kind of confusing, and we'll probably discuss this a little bit more later, like in the boardroom. So in the boardroom, I may be giving legal advice as the general counsel. I may be there as a corporate secretary, and I may also be reporting on compliance matters. So you can be wearing multiple hats in one setting and have to really kind of keep that distinct and make sure whomever you're talking to understands where that advice, where that counsel is coming from.
Thanks, Paul and Marty. So Carl, Isaac, you're both experienced CEOs. In your case, Isaac, I know that you've been a GC before, but wearing your CEO hat here, please share your thoughts and expectations when it comes to the GCs. Specifically, it relates to the GCs supporting you as the CEO. And Isaac, I'm going to go to you first, and then Carl will follow up with you.
Hey, AB, thank you for that. And you know, I align with everything that Marty and Paul shared, and specifically around that title around Chief Legal Officer. So just with my CEO hat on, and every now and then I have to remind the board that, you know, I'm not the general counsel anymore. We have someone down in the table. But, you know, I would say but for me as CEO, it starts with being a member of the executive team, you know, completely understanding the business, in helping, you know, identify risk and opportunities, you know, to help me run the business as a team, as a member of the executive team. And a little bit further, the other point is, you know, serving as that trusted advisor, and for lack of a better word, that chief ethical officer within the organization. And as Paul said, you know, many times, you know, that chief legal officer has to figure out who is the client on the other end. And last but not least, I would share that, you know, from my seat, I think, that general counsel helps the team define those bright lines of the left and right limits. And clearly, by the time you get to the C-suite, it's easy to identify illegal, unethical, or immoral decisions or there. But when you have the chief legal officer who can set those boundaries, then the leadership team, the CEO can run within those boundaries. And then, you know, the chief legal officer can advise as you get closer to those boundaries, what those risks may be. So those are the three things I think, as far as that chief legal officer in that relationship with the CEO.
Thank you, Isaac. Let's toss it over to Carl. I know that this is something that he has thoughts on. So Carl, let's hear it.
Super. Well, I have the privilege of following a CEO, and a former general counsel. That's really interesting, AB, as we jump into this. And I had the privilege to have Admiral Cruz support me when I was the chief operating officer at USAA. So I have a really great benefit here to be on this call. One of the things I think is most important for the role of the CEO is to recognize the role of his or her general counsel, chief legal officer, and really work to establish that relationship. I think the most of us know how lonely these jobs are in these leadership positions. Admiral Cruz and I had a way we operated, and I like to talk to my chief legal officer, general counsel every day. I like to start the day with that relationship, because I want that chief legal officer, general counsel, to be an advisor, a close advisor, in how we're thinking about decision making as a business, and getting that input up front before a meeting where the entire team is together and those kind of things is the importance of, I think CEOs relying on their legal counsel to navigate those decisions, because every decision comes with risk. And certainly as you start to think about that and how it impacts, there's a role in a trustworthy way that the general counsel plays in that conversation. And it's important in that conversation to set that relationship right and recognize who you're working with, so you can deploy that activity in a safe, private manner, so that the CEO can go into an all-hands meeting or a meeting with his or her leadership team and already have that advice of their, I'll call it, senior most advisor, who are assigned to think about the full circle of risk in that manner. So that relationship and that trust between your general counsel and a CEO is one of the key most relationships that there is in running an ethical organization, but also running a compliant one, and thinking about the decisions that you're making as a leader and ensuring that you understand the risks in that conversation. So I can't share it up. It's hard to be one team if you don't have a great general counsel by your side to help you think about these decisions, because all of them come with trade-offs.
Thanks, Carl. I almost, for a while there, moment there, I felt I was back at USAA with you, working arm in arm, and that was something I always treasured. Okay, Paul, Marty, you heard what the CEO said. Does how you go about your jobs and supporting your CEOs align with that? And what more can you add to the dynamic?
Paul, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I think what General Johnson and Carl said were spot on. I mean, I found that in my career, worked for a long time, 2 big international law firms, and then transitioning in-house. And sort of the delta there, the dynamic that changes is when you're outside counsel, you're really focused on the law and reporting the law and counseling the law and such. When you move in-house, what I heard the General and Carl say is they're looking for a business partner. They're looking for a teammate. And you can use metaphors of sports teams or military teams, but they want somebody that stands shoulder to shoulder with you. So you've got to marry the legal advice with the business plan. And for myself, I took down some notes prior to the call, and what I've found successful for myself is really understanding the business model and the CEO's vision. And that applies to the GMs or the division president or whomever you're working with, right? You have to understand where they're trying to get to, because I've always appreciated the term counselor. So you're trying to give advice that takes those 2 pieces and pulls them together, right? So what you want to do is, in doing that, you want to assess your alignment of knowledge, skills, and abilities with the requirements. You want, just like anybody else would do on a sports team or military team, you want to build a plan to support it. You want to constantly act, assess, and update. And then what I also heard Carl say is communicate, right? So you got to communicate constantly to kind of do those sort of tasks, assess and act and update. Communicate up, communicate down, communicate laterally. Marty?
Yeah, and I'd add onto that, Paul. I totally agree with everything that you said. And one of the things that Carl had mentioned is looking at it from a full risk perspective. And so I start and end my day speaking with my wife. If Carl, you start and end your day speaking with your general counsel, that's up to you, sir. But I very much appreciate the sentiment. And I think I do speak with my CEO every day as well. And that full circle of risk, I'd even broaden it a little further and say it's not just from the risk perspective, but as Paul was mentioning, really tying in the whole overall business perspective and coming at it from the lens on the legal, risk, compliance, ethics, all of it together and connecting the dots. One of the things that I say to my teams, and whether that's my current legal team, legal and compliance team, or the senior leadership team, is that all roads lead to legal. We are a cross-functional department by definition. Everything that the business touches, we have an impact on. And so for us to be able to have that perspective and provide that consigliere type of advice, that wartime counsel, if you will, not just in wartime, but also while we're preparing for that, I think it's very beneficial.
Thank you, guys. Okay, now, I think what the audience really likes to hear is, some true stories. All of us have been in the military, and we have a habit of sharing what we call sea stories. Or my wife often says that she hears the same stories over and over, but as she meets people that I know that I served with, and they're telling the same story, she goes, "Those sea stories are actually true." So this is where we're gonna become very authentic for our audience, and I think it's real important. So, panelists, let's raise that authenticity level a notch by sharing some real life sea stories. I'd like each of you to share an instance when you experienced a great GC CEO relationship and what made it great, or an instance when the GC CEO relationship was perhaps less than optimal and what you did to rectify that. You can, of course, refrain, or maybe you should refrain from mentioning specific names, but I think the audience would love to hear it. So, Carl, I'm going to turn to you first, actually, and put you on the spot.
Okay, all right, well, thanks. And Marty's funny, because, you know, as a good naval officer, we all know we first start when we meet with our spouses before we meet with our general counsel. So, but I think there's a conversation here for the group and how to think about this. And a little bit of what I shared is you really want, you know, as a leader, you want to always seek the truth. And it's really difficult. And I had a leader once that I worked for at GE share with me that when you become a CEO, you're going to spend 99% of your time seeking the truth. And it was ironic to me what that meant, because in a team environment, if you're creating trust, you're always going to get the truth. His point was, you're going to get the truth according to them and how they share it with you. And so you're going to constantly be filtering that. I think that carries over, though, when, you know, your general counsel comes to you, and I had this happen to me many years ago, and share some issue with some minutes from a committee meeting and a board meeting that didn't coincide with what might have happened. And at that point, you look at these after careful instruction, and you have a decision to make in what to do in that very moment as a CEO, realizing that whatever decision you make, not only is your general counsel and the people you work for going to look to you as a leader, but also that this is going to come with trailing ramifications for potentially the board of directors and those kind of things. And so I had a really great advisor, mentor of mine, who was GC for me with me at Circuit City and briefly worked with me at 24 Hour. And he's a dear friend of mine now. He said, you know, my boy, as I always told you, things aren't important until they are important. And as you start to think about how you're going to navigate this situation, I want you to remember that. And so as that wisdom came to me, AB, to think through that, I knew I only had one decision to make. I knew that it would potentially compromise me as a leader. It would potentially compromise me in the trustful relationship that I had with my board. But I also knew that this was not the right thing to do, and that it had to be brought to the attention of the appropriate folks. And so set out, got on a plane, flew across the country, and had the most difficult conversation, much of my career probably, where I had to expose quite a few things that were unsavory at best, but at the least, most important was it was brought to light, and I'm fortunate that it was, you know, dealt with appropriately and recognized appropriately. But I'm sure it didn't come at great personal risk to myself about the decisions and those kind of things. And you have that moment as a leader where you can go along to be along, or you step up for what your values are, and the values that really, in this case, was brought to my attention by my general counsel. If I don't do something responsibly with this moment, I'm forever compromised with him and our leadership relationship. And so just to appreciate the advice that I've always been able to get in those situations, but I'd say it's not without personal risk or professional risk when you decide to take on those things.
Thanks, Carl. Sounds like a lot of lessons learned there that have stayed with you. Isaac, your thoughts, please.
Thanks, AB. You know, and I'll try to keep it kind of tight. But I'll bring two quick situations. The first situation is where most of the chief legal officers, general counsels have joined law firms and grew up through a law firm, and then at some point maybe became in-house counsel. And of course, you have those that may have started as a young counsel, company counsel and corporate counsel, and then just moved away up to GC. In the latter example, you know, I've had those experiences where you know, we had a senior legal person that came over from the law firm, and it wasn't that good transition. I think there is a transition. I made that transition. I'm not saying I did a good job of it, but I made that transition. But at some point, your CEO is not looking for a brief. If I open up the email and it's a couple of paragraphs, I'm like, I may read the top line, I may read the bottom line, and I may pick up the phone and say, okay, what's going on here? So there is a cadence of business communication that I think that, I would share this critically important in that relationship. The second one I would say just very quickly is there is something about decision making. And if you're a chief legal counsel, general counsel, and you find yourself making decisions with a business partner, then I'm not sure if that's the right relationship. And then, or it could go the other way. If you find yourself a business leader pushing decisions over to the legal team to assume the risk, I'm not sure there. So I think we all know that there is a special relationship there where you're giving advice and counsel, identifying risk, but ultimately it's a business leader who's going to assume that risk, make that decision. So I'll pause there and thanks. Okay.
Thanks, Isaac. Marty, good, bad, ugly story? What do you have?
Plenty of stories. Let's see if I can find one with a pithy lesson learned, if you will. And I wanted to address one of the questions that I think has come up in the Q&A is also noting that we are a group of GCs and CEOs who are veterans and looking for those females who are also GCs, CEOs, and veterans, and making sure that we are consciously looking at the ladder and making sure that we are providing opportunities to folks. So with that, I'll provide a anecdote of one instance where and I'll say it the way that Isaac the general had mentioned earlier. A friend of mine had heard about this situation in which this occurred. So the board of a particular company was looking for a candidate for a senior leadership role that fit certain expectations and compromised the qualifications on other things in weighing up certain types of those specifications, if you will. And so the lesson learned from there is that when there was an opportunity for the senior leadership of that company to listen to other parts of the team and ensure that we were getting the best candidates in who had all of the requisite requirements, not just certain ones that were being emphasized. And that communication was lacking, which led to a poor decision overall that ended up becoming, had to be supported by the rest of the team and eventually being rectified. So the lesson learned is being able to have that good communication, creating that trust environment between the legal counsel, the general counsel, chief legal officer, and the rest of the senior leadership team to ensure that those perspectives are heard. I think I've changed enough of the names to protect the innocent, and I'll pause there before I go too deep and pass it over to Paul.
Okay, thanks, Marty. I think, and I'll echo what the panel has said. I mean, I think the common theme here is communication. The understanding has to be that there's a certain amount in any business plan, any business execution, there's a certain amount of uncertainty, maybe even a certain level of chaos, right? And analogy might be with this group, sailing a ship, right? If you look on a nautical chart, you want to go from point A to point B, that lane may be well traveled and it would seem very simple, but the seas change, there may be other traffic in the way, weather changes, all those sorts of things. And so you have to navigate it successfully. So communication, and resetting your course is very important. Now, my quick story would be, and I should have said a little bit earlier, kind of the background of the company. We're a tech company with global reach, mid-sized, but privately held, right? And so the board had decided it was in the best interest of the company to conduct a common stock repurchase, which is not very common for a private company. So even though they decided to do this, when we started working through it, when I'm briefing the board, briefing the CEO, they started to really appreciate and understand the complexity and the issues that arise from that sort of transaction. Layered on top of that was the fact that we have a very particular shareholder base that includes a corporate investor, founders, and some other high net worth individuals, and then an employee base. And so they have all their own particular goals and motivations, and sometimes they diverge and sometimes they're aligned. So we really had to pay particular attention and kind of communicate back and forth throughout the entire transaction, mitigating the risks, mitigating the apprehensions and fears to get to a successful transaction. And at the end of the day, just to wind it up, it was successful. We kind of mirrored public company rules where they're applicable. Got tremendous feedback from the shareholder base. It's very well subscribed. Some even wrote the CEO and with appreciation and those sorts of things. So it was a very tense moment for a period of about 6 months. But at the end of the day, it all worked out very well.
Good. Thanks, Paul and Marty. And we're going to stay with you two first. We want to obviously add into our discussion the dynamic of your role and responsibility vis-a-vis the board. As GC, and oftentimes as corporate secretary, and sometimes as chief compliance officer, chief risk officer, what have you, GCs have unique obligations with respect to his or her organization's board, usually interfacing directly with the board chair or lead independent director when the CEO is also the board chair, and board committee chairs, right? And let's be clear here, there are times when what's discussed between the GC and the board or a board member is not something that can or should be discussed with the CEO. Those moments do happen. They're few and far between, at least in my experience. But okay, Paul and Marty, how do you or have you navigated that particular dynamic? Marty.
Yep. Thanks, AB. So just like any navigation problem, as we Marines know, requires a map and requires communication. So we navigate differently than the folks in the Navy who just, point the boat in a direction sort of thing, or the Air Force. It kind of just zooms over at 50,000 feet. So using this map and good communication helps us to navigate the board CEO GC dynamic. And some key terrain features, those are hills and stuff for the Navy folks in the Army. That's all key terrain features on the map are the board as a resource. So making sure that relationship between management team and the board is set as collaborative, and making sure that the management sees the board as a resource and not as a must-do kind of report out sort of thing. The board as fiduciaries, so making sure that the chief legal officer informs and helps the board meet their fiduciary duties of care, loyalty, et cetera, to all of our constituents, not just the shareholders, but the employees, our patients, our customers, et cetera. And making sure that the board culture itself is one of collaboration where all of the voices are heard and that everybody's is working with 2 ears and 1 mouth most of the time. That's the way to be able to make sure that those terrain features are on the map, and then adding on to it the communication between the GC and the CEO being clear as to what the roles are, that there will be times when the board goes directly to the GC and it's in confidence, et cetera. Some of the tactical things that are helpful in this regard are making sure that after each board meeting, there is when the board breaks up and has an executive session, that there is an executive session that includes the chief legal officer so that they can get the feedback from that chief legal officer. And then that he or she can exit and the board can have their own discussion separately. And then someone else comes and tells the chief legal officer how to report that in the minutes, if you will. So that hopefully that gives a perspective of sort of from the strategic down to a tactical of how to make that dynamic happen.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Marty. Paul, anything to add there?
Just a little bit. I mean, I think Marty was spot on again. A little bit more about my particular situation. So we're sitting in a company where one, I'm wearing both the hat of general counsel or chief legal officer and also chief compliance officer. I wouldn't say that's not normal, but there are cases, in most cases, I'd say in larger companies, publicly traded companies, where those are 2 separate roles. And also, like in my company, the CEO sits on the board. So he's going to find out, virtually everything, if not all things that the board knows. But I'd say where some value comes in, we've already talked about it, is when you're in that boardroom is kind of, you end up being, I find myself end up being sort of the referee and umpire of the board meeting. So understanding what hat you're wearing, where your advice is coming from. Very, very, I think, important in some of these cases. The stock repurchase program I mentioned is an example. And other matters, I may be giving advice to the board on when they need to recuse themselves, when it's not appropriate for you to be either sitting in this discussion or voting on this matter because of some sort of tie. We have independent directors, we have directors that are tied to shareholders, and those kind of get kind of a complex. And so I find myself being the umpire, the navigator, the referee of the boardroom, and in a good way. There's no, we have a very good culture in our boardroom. But, yeah.
Isaac, Carl, you're both experienced CEOs, but also board members. We've heard what the GCs have had to say on the call. What do you have to say, Isaac?
Thanks, Amy. I don't have a lot to add, but I was looking at the thread, in some of the threads, in some of the Q&A there, and something that keeps this resonate with me is I definitely want to say, happy, Women's International Day in recognition of that. And I saw a couple of questions around there, and I'll tell you, I had a wonderful opportunity when I was serving as corporate secretary at USAA. The general counsel, chief legal officer was Deneen Donnelly, and who was just a wonderful person, and she continues to lead that chief legal officer and general counsel at a major company there in New York. So with that being, and by the way, and she was tough. There was a question about that. She was tough, and she was really good. So with that, only thing I have to share is there is an opportunity where you can split the titles. As I was served as corporate secretary, and there was a general counsel, and clearly we had very clear lines of responsibilities, and it was very important for the board to understand that. The CEO, of course, knew what those responsibilities were, and so there's opportunities where you can serve as split those roles. Corporate secretary is opining on board governance and working out the agendas with the chair, corporate minutes, and maybe in some of those conversations that are in executive committee, that executive committee will be having, where the GC may not be a part of that. And so the last thing I would say in that dynamics of the GC, corporate secretary, and board, it's something about just being respectful to the people's roles. And so even as CEO, I have a corporate secretary, and there's just certain things I'm not going to ask my corporate secretary if they're coming out of an executive session. It's a kind of a respect thing there. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Isaac. Carl.
Yeah, Isaac, it's so great to hear that. I had the privilege to have Deneen serve as our general counsel on the USAA Bank Board, which I was the vice chairman of, and got to watch her be promoted to the chief legal officer and general counsel at USAA. So they don't come any finer than Deneen, and certainly she has a habit of telling all of us operators just what we need to hear when we need to hear it. So I'm grateful for her and so many things that she led us through. I think this is I know AB, we've got a lot of general counsels and aspiring GCs on this Zoom, and I think this is really an important part about who you're working with and creating clear lines of responsibility and clarity. And I know there are CEOs that expect allegiance and support no matter what they do and say. And it makes it a tough, challenging situation for a GC or a chief legal officer coming away. But I think it's really important in that relationship conversation, even as you're exploring maybe a job move to a different opportunity, is make sure you understand the leadership dynamics of who you're going to work with, and make sure they understand what your role is going to be if you take this assignment and this. So I think about role clarity as most important here. And that means in every great relationship, there's a give and take. And so the ability for two people to develop that great working relationship with a foundation of trust, and then appreciate the idea that there's going to be times as a CEO, you're going to be outside the room. And this chief legal officer, who is the secretary of the board, is going to be talking to the directors without you. And if you don't trust that person implicitly, it's going to make it extraordinarily difficult to be effective as a leader. And I think that conversation of trust and relationship is vitally important, and making sure that you exercise that trust on a common ground. And when the chief legal officer, corporate secretary tells you, hey, we had some things, we talked about some things, I can't share them with you, how you react to that and how your CEO might react to that says a lot about how they want that relationship between GC, CEO, consigliere, or board secretary. Very, very important. And if you see that tension developing, it's important to seek help with that CEO to say, I'm feeling tension about this. Can we talk about it? Can we expose that and get that in the open? So it's really important. And I think it's the most effective. It helps a good general counsel, corporate secretary to navigate some very potentially uncomfortable conversations with their CEO business partner.
Thank you, sir. And let me interject too. I know that it is coincidental that our panel fell on International Women's Day, and I did discuss this very point with my colleagues at Barker Gilmore. So the last webinar that I hosted last year, I will point out that, and I was very proud of it. I had 2 or 3 women who I had worked with personally that had attained the general counsel positions, actually several of them. And so it was my privilege to present and to discuss with my former colleagues who had ascended the ranks. So I had all women on that particular panel. So and this panel, I had really worked to make sure that we showed off our military veterans. So that said, I do congratulate and honor and celebrate International Women's Day, and wanted to take that time to say that. So I know it's come up in the chat quite a bit. Let's quickly do a round robin because it's a storytelling time. And so if you could share a quick story, about the kind of the triad dynamic, again, good, bad, or ugly, that would be, I think, good for our audience. So Marty, why don't you start?
You always go to me first, but thank you, AB. I appreciate that. Lead off.
You're a
hitter, if you
Marine.
will.
You're a Marine. You're supposed to
hit the
go
beach.
first.
Roger that, sir. Absolutely, 100%. Happy to do it. I think the biggest thing for me is it's all about the communication piece. The triad, when you think about the legs of a stool and being the foundation for a strong business, it's made more difficult when one of those legs has multiple feet, if you will, right? So by that, I mean, if the board is not speaking with one voice, or perhaps there's a disconnect between the chief legal officer and the chief compliance officer on a thing or something like that. So now you've, instead of 3 legs of the stool that have to communicate, which is already hard, now you've got 3 legs with multiple feet, and it's even more difficult to make that happen. So the key takeaway for me is being able to employ those communication skills to be able to form consensus in each of those legs, and then consensus among those legs. So I'll tie this in with one of the questions that I saw on the chat in the difference between men and women and how we communicate and the different styles. I think that good leaders take lessons from everyone on their team, and again, use the 2 ears and the 1 mouth perspective of being able to incorporate and bring out the best in each of those team members, regardless of gender, other types of diversity perspectives, et cetera. Diversity only works if we're really listening and bringing out those perspectives from folks. So one of the key tactics that I've used recently to make sure that that happens is to solicit that input ahead of time, or in a way that is not in front of a big group, so that I can make sure that someone who's either a little more introverted, whether or not they're male or female, or it has a different style of communication, I'm really getting that input to make sure that that is part of the stew, if you will, that makes a good meal. So that wasn't necessarily a story per se, because I didn't want to, again, protecting the innocent, but bringing it back down to the communication and allowing each of our voices to be heard. And it's incumbent upon the leader to make that happen.
Thank you, Marty. Paul, quickly to you.
Yes, thanks, AB. So here's the thing. I think that, lawyer at their core is a professional and a servant of sorts. You're in the service-oriented business. And so I often check in with my boss, the CEO of the company, and ask him, how am I doing? How's the team doing? And so when I was getting ready for this panel, I asked him the same thing. I said, I'm going to sit on this panel, and what's your thoughts? How am I doing? And what would you like to tell the audience? And so his notes really echo the conversation here. So he said the CEO and board will look to the GC with options and recommendations with risks taken into consideration, not just the facts and the law. The CEO and GC need to have a relationship that feels very comfortable talking to others about sensitive and hard issues. They need to be able to approach each other on any topic without fear or concern. And then finally, he said, trust is the key. And that's what makes it all work.
Copy that. Isaac, I'll go to you.
Just like well said, that was shared with Paul. Trust is the issue. And every now and then, I think it's important for chief legal officers to share with the board, to remind them of the business judgment rule. And so if you understand the business judgment rule, then that alone itself should help you to move towards trusting the information that's coming to you, and so that those relationships and that communication continues to flow between the triad, as we say. And as a board member, you don't feel compelled to reach down into the organization to ask to verify something that's been given to you in the board setting. So I just echoed everything that was just shared. Thanks.
Thanks, Isaac. Mr. Liebert, what do you have to say?
Yeah, beautifully said by everyone. I think as a CEO, you think about your general counsel, chief legal officer, and your CFO as extraordinarily important in how you lead and operate a company. Those two control partners, for lack of I'll use a financial term there, but those two leaders having diversity from how the CEO leads to how they lead to who they are and how you put that together. It's important. And then I think CEOs have to give permission to their chief legal partner and their CFO to have the two of them collaborate when necessary and come in and tell their CEO he or she's not getting the job done the right way and he's not making the correct decision. So creating the freedom and leveraging that with the board, that a CFO and a chief legal officer know that they have a senior executive, the chief executive, and that they know when one of them can't convince, they can come together and help that CEO make the right decision in those conversations. I think that's an important relationship with the CEO. I also see it as an important relationship with the board. So as a general counsel, chief legal officer, corporate secretary, you want that board to know you've got great stewardship and partnership between the CFO and themselves, that they're going to make sure that CEO are making all the right fiduciary decisions, ethical decisions along the way, and that they know that they have an open door to be able to go and influence that.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you, Carl. Any of our panelists have kind of a closing 10 or 15 seconds of any point or recommendation for our audience that you want to throw out? Anyone before I bring John back to close us out, or maybe cover any last minute questions that might have been posted on the Q&A. Any closing recommendations or thoughts?
So I'll give two from Princess Bride and one for myself. So 2, never get into a land war in Asia. Never go against a Sicilian when death is on the line, and never lose your beginner's mindset. So having that beginner's mindset always leads to a perspective of lifelong learning, growth, and resilience, and absolutely being a servant leader to our teams. That's it.
Wonderful said. Anything else?
Yeah, I was just throwing there, AB, to say, and I said it earlier, you're a member of a team, you're wearing a team shirt. And so please continue to show up as a teammate. And, and we've heard this before, find ways to say yes and or advise that if you can't do that, say, well, here's an alternative of how we can get there. So, I'm not a Navy guy, but I understand the shipping, trying to get from one point to the other. So I got it.
We'll continue to work with you, Isaac, on that.
AB, I'd say just understand in which situations you're the supported or you're the supporting. In other words, what are decision rights? And in certain cases, you as the chief legal officer, we're here to support you in helping us make the right decision and making that clear to the rest of the team that this is a legal call, or this is our compliance call, or this call. And everybody here needs to help us make the right decision. That supporting conversation that I think General McChrystal adequately talked about in Team of Teams, it really applies well when you're talking about this role.
Wonderfully said. John, I'm going to turn it over to you. Make sure that we covered everything.
That sounds great. First of all, you guys, we really appreciate you being part of this this panel. I'm sitting here and as I turn my video monitor off and I'm watching the panel, the first thing that occurred to me is, oh no, we there isn't a woman on this panel. And as AB, you mentioned many times, we have an all-woman panel. We are very, very diligent about diversity, and 57% of our placements last year were women. And a lot of questions are coming in. And you guys really did a great job of jumping right on it. Even some of the touchy situation of knowing that we fell a little bit short here with women on this panel. But that said, the questions are coming in as far as CEOs that want to separate the general counsel from the board. They want to be closely aligned with the board without the general counsel. And then there's CEOs that require, and boards that require different leaders or different communication style, whether it's a woman or a male. And I'll just say, you're asking for advice, and I say, you can't stereotype it. People, different boards and different leaders are just different, and you need to understand that. And one of my interview questions, prep questions to ask on an interview, is to really understand what type of person and personality, what is the culture of this leadership team, what type of person is going to fit in best with this leadership team. And the questions are valid. There's CEOs that don't want a GC in their business when it comes to the board. And it's something to know walking in the door. So you want to do your diligence. You don't want to be asking all these questions first interview, walking in the door. You'll never have a second interview. But as you go through the process to learn about the communication style that's most effective, or the demands or the interest in the CEO, and what person and personality or style is going to do best with this person. You want the job only if it's right for you, whether you're a man or a woman. And if it's the right fit and the right chemistry and it works on both ends, then great. And if you don't get the job and you thought you should have gotten the job, but you didn't get the job, a lot of times you just say, well, I guess it wasn't meant to be. And that's the way it works out. So, I just say getting that GC position is a tough position, but I have a lot of respect for the men and women general counsel that go through many different leadership changes. And when I interview them, they tell me about the different style and approach of each of these leaders, and they were able to adapt and adjust to it. And I think that's the name of the game, is being able to adapt and adjust to the style of the leader in the room. And that's what makes a great GC and gives longevity over the long term. So all that said, I will invite anyone, male or female, if anyone's interested in serving on one of these panels and being able to share their stories as candid as everyone shared their stories today, we welcome that and we appreciate that. And everyone in the audience appreciates it. So feel free to reach out to me, to Bob, to any of our advisors, offer up suggestion for future questions or webinars, and also be offering up ideas for papers. We actually just put out, if you want to go to our website, we just put out a paper yesterday talking about the advanced obligations and requirements for a chief compliance officer. As we talk about the CCO's role constantly evolving, we talked about the chief compliance officer and how that role has evolved in 2023. And we're hearing a lot of great feedback. We're looking for more articles that, again, help people understand what they need to be thinking about or considering when they're helping to guide the CEO and the board and the others on the leadership team. So all that said, if anyone's looking for a great recruiter or a great coach, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have a chance to chat with you about your needs, and or if you're aspiring to become a general counsel and want to become on our radar or a chief compliance officer, feel free to reach out to us. We will put you in touch with a great recruiter or a great coach to help position you for success. So all that said, thank you again for everyone. Thank you for your service to our panel. We really do appreciate everyone being here and everyone attending. So thanks again.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.